I'm going to explain why communication skills are so often not the answer when relationships are in trouble. Now, couples often show up to couples therapy stating that that's their need. They need help with communication. When we start to get more information, they explain how they convey all their anger and contempt and disappointment for each other really pretty clearly. That doesn't sound like communication troubles to me. Often I think there is a better way to approach our marital problems or our relationship problems than just focusing on communication skills. And I'm going to give you 5 ways today to work on conflict in your relationship that can help you move from conflict to connection much more effectively. Now, I put so much stock in these 5 that 2 of them, the last 2, I refer to, when we combine those 2, they are the kryptonite of conflict. The better we are at doing those things, the less conflict can live and thrive in our relationships. Now, how did I come up with this opinion? So, my training as a counselor is not in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's in integrative and relational therapy. My tendency is to look at larger patterns, things like how does anger, how do emotions live in the body? What are these relational patterns that we can observe in our relationships when we take a bird's eye view to what's going on? And I think this is a pretty different perspective. I also have advanced training in nonviolent communication. So to be clear, I'm not here to bash communication skills. I love a good I feel statement at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. I just don't think it's a cure-all. I've worked with couples for many years as a couples therapist, and I've seen so many of them are frustrated just recycling old patterns over and over and over again, never finding the benefit that they hope for from working on communication skills, which, by the way, they already have. Now, let's take a story from a hypothetical couple, Frank and Mary. Now, Frank texts Mary during the workday and says, "Hey, Mary, I'm going to go watch a basketball game with a friend after work and have a drink, and I'll be home around 8. Mary says, "Fine, have fun. I will hold dinner for you so that when you get home we can eat together." Frank says, "Good." Well, so Frank watches his game with his friend, and the game goes into overtime, and he gets into good conversation with his friend, and he forgets his phone, leaves it in the car, and so he just kind of is in his own little world, and he doesn't get home at 8. Frank gets home about 9:30 or 10. And when Frank walks in the door, having had a fun night and not really thinking about anything else, he walks in the door and Mary comes flying at him in a rage. "Where have you been? What is wrong with you? You have no respect for me. You don't care about me. You don't care about this marriage. You're a terrible partner." Well, Frank's kind of blown away by this. And Frank does what we do when we get attacked, right? Remember studying Newton's third law in school? Every action is met with an equal and opposite reaction. It's not just a law of physics. It absolutely is present in relationships too. So when we get pushed, our natural tendency is to push back. So Frank fires back at her, defending himself, pointing out at ways that Mary, did the same thing to him a couple days before. And so things start to get really heated, back and forth, and then they start to get ugly. And they resort to name-calling and character assassination kind of stuff. Until Mary just becomes completely overwhelmed. She's flooded with her upset and anger, and she just shuts down. She says, "Fine, whatever." And Frank's still trying to resolve their issue, or at least engage the disagreement, and Mary's just done. She's like, "Whatever, fine, you're right, I'm wrong, you win." Does this feel familiar to you in any way in your relationships? Have you been through this pattern? This is what researcher Dr. John Gottman refers to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, where stage 1, we have criticism. Now, criticism is not, "Hey, you said you'd be home an hour and a half ago, what's the what?" Criticism is turning that into some kind of a personal attack. Step 2 is defensiveness, where we fire back. Step 3 is when it gets ugly, name-calling, ugliness. Step 4 is when we get flooded and we go into what we call stonewalling, the refusal to engage, the taking control of the situation by shutting it down completely. And Dr. Gottman refers to this pattern as something that's very, very toxic and troubling in relationships. The more it shows up, the more difficult it's going to be for that relationship to persevere. Dr. Gottman also claims that through his research, up to 69% of disagreements in a marriage or a partnership, there actually is no resolution for. There's not a way to get on the same page and resolve this disagreement. We have to find another way. Pair that with the research of Dr. Albert Mehrabian, who did a lot of research on emotional communication in relationships. And what Dr. Mehrabian found is that when we perceive emotional information from our partner, only 7% of that we perceive through the words they say. The other 93% is all nonverbal. Vocal tone, body language, facial expression, all those kinds of things. And so for the rare couple who truly doesn't know how to communicate with kindness, they haven't figured that out, fixing this still only solves a tiny part of their problem, and it just still leaves them devastated and exhausted. Now, why is this concept of communication skills so popular? It's a coping skill that I think rests very neatly in the cognitive behavioral solution-focused world of counseling. And again, I'm not here to bash that. There's a lot of good work being done there, and it certainly has its place. Especially, I think, when couples first show up, things are really on fire. I think these kinds of coping skills, quick communication things, can give us a quick win. And if things are really in trouble, a quick win is a heck of a start. And so again, I am not bashing that. I just think there's more that we need to talk about. Frankly, it's easy for authors to come up with ways to repackage that and publish new books. And so we can run into this situation where the couple has a lot of people cash in their check, and yet they're left playing whack-a-mole, still trying to figure out how to come up with the right I feel statement to get your partner to quit yelling at you. What works instead? I think the first thing we need to recognize is that we're talking about the world of human relation, human interaction. So we need to realize there are no easy answers. I am not a fan of a one-size-fits-all approach to this. We need to stop trying to rely on simple solutions to solve complex problems. That being said, I think there are some basic habits and skills that can help us, and a lot of these fall under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, but not all of them. And I'm planning a video later on about emotional intelligence, so if you want me to hurry up on that, do me a favor, leave me a comment below and let me know if you'd like me to get that done a little more quickly. Here are 5 of the really important and helpful relationship skills that I think can help you build your relationship up and build connection. Number 1 is emotional self-regulation. You gotta be able to manage your own stuff and keep your own temper under control. Mary didn't do a very good job of that, and frankly, neither did Frank. They both engaged in what Dr. Gottman calls a rapid startup. As soon as this issue came up, they were off and running. And Dr. Gottman teaches us also that the rapid startup is a very toxic thing for a relationship. We go from zero to boom very quickly in a relationship. Things just go from bad to worse very quickly. So we have to work individually on handling our own stuff, learning how to manage our own feelings, our own triggers. Your feelings and triggers are yours, not your partner's. They are not responsible for your emotional reaction. Now, does that mean that sometimes partners push each other buttons? Sure. But even when that happens, I think it can help us a lot to get better at managing those things even when our buttons are getting pushed. The good news is that this is something we can work on. You can do your own work with your own therapist or in your own way to get better control of your own emotional regulation. Number 2 is boundaries. When we can learn how to tease out our own emotional experience from our partners and recognize that we don't have to feel the same way they do, we get better at not personalizing those things. It becomes more tolerable for our partner to be upset with us. We still care about it, we're still moved by that, but we engage it in a very different way. Just because your partner's upset does not mean you have to be. And similarly, just because you're upset doesn't mean that the only way for your partner to show that they care about that is to become upset too. If you're upset and your partner can remain calm and be present for you, that can actually be a very healthy, reparative thing in a relationship. So working on your own emotional regulation, your own boundaries, and when both partners can do that, it can pay incredible dividends for a relationship. Number 3, we need to learn how to head off conflict before it starts. The more we are able to talk to our partner, to start these conversations with, this is how I'm feeling, these are my emotions, and these are my needs. The more we talk about our feelings, our needs, instead of all the ways that your partner is upsetting you with their actions and their words, it changes things in how we get these conversations going. Our tendency is to focus on our partner's actions and words. And when we do that, there's always something to argue about, right? And so, again, don't forget that Newton's third law, it applies to relationships. So in Ask, Don't Tell, I think what we do is we work to exchange you said, you did for asking what's going on, for talking about your own emotions in a given situation. When we do that, we avoid your partner feeling attacked. The other thing we do is we take a lot of these points of conflict off the table, because if Mary could have just started that conversation with, hey, Frank, I'm really upset and hurt. I'd like to talk about it. What's Frank going to say? No, you're not. You're not upset. You're not hurt. There's no way for him to disagree with that. It does instigate some other things in him that can be very useful. We'll talk about here in just a second. You still get to talk about your concerns, but we just are approaching them in a very different way. It's a much smoother on-ramp to the conversation that you really want to have with your partner, because you get to be concerned about their actions and their concerns and what that means for your relationship. But when we can start with talking about how this affects us and what we need from them, it can change things dramatically. Now, let's get to the kryptonite of conflict, because this is some of my favorite stuff. The last two. Number 4 is empathy. And empathy, in my opinion, is absolutely one of the most foundational things present in a healthy, connected relationship. So the way I understand empathy is the basic question, what's it like to be you? What's going on with you right now? Now, there are a lot of ways that we can express empathy, sometimes just by asking a range of questions, the two that I just asked. How did that feel? What are your emotions right now? What was it like for you to go through that? Other variations would be, how can I help? What do you think you need from me? How can I show up for you at this time in ways that you need? When we can begin there, it's a completely different conversation. Now, if we don't necessarily know what questions to ask, or we want to just take a different approach to make it feel right, we can do what's called an empathic guess. We can say, gosh, that sounds really upsetting. Or, I think I'd be really devastated if that happened. And so often the empathic guess can be a win-win, whether you get it right or not. Because if you say to your partner, gosh, I think I would be devastated. Were you devastated with that? Then if they were, then suddenly you've built a connection there. They feel seen, they feel heard, they feel understood. If they don't feel devastated, they feel angry, they can say, no, I wasn't devastated, but I was sure mad. Then you've just figured out how they felt. You've built that connection with them. You've achieved a greater understanding. Kind of, again, more from a bird's eye view, too. When we lean on empathy, ask, don't tell, then what we're really demonstrating to our partner is that we don't consider ourselves to be the experts on them. And when we can demonstrate that, it just kind of cultivates equity in a relationship that I think is a lot more healthy and helpful. It helps your partners feel seen and heard, and even if they've done something to upset you, it helps, it avoids accusations. It avoids your partner feeling judged or attacked. And what's interesting is that you may think you know what's going on with them, but if you ask and you give them an opportunity to share that with you, sometimes you can be really surprised to learn new things about your partner and realize that your perceptions are not always accurate when it comes to what's going on in your relationship. Now, related to number 4, empathy, is number 5, the other half of the kryptonite of conflict, compassion. So compassion, among other things, and there's all kinds of books about compassion out there that you can check out. I'll recommend some to you. Compassion, the way I understand it, among other things, is the ability to be non-judgmental and present for someone when they are not at their best. When your partner is hurting, when they're angry, even if they're angry at you, when you can do what we call hold space for that person, it is the ultimate in acceptance and support. And so when your partner, don't forget, their feelings are not your feelings. So if your partner is mad as a hornet and you can say, okay, I hear that. What's going on? You're holding space for that. You're helping them give that a voice. And when your partner's upset, especially with you, this is probably a far more productive way to get that conversation going than explaining to them why you're right and they're wrong, or they shouldn't be mad at you. They don't have a right to be mad at you. This is so often unproductive. So empathy and compassion are the kryptonite of conflict. They undermine most of the opportunities we have for these big blow-ups, and it kind of gives us a smooth on-ramp into more productive, connective conversations that actually have a chance of helping what's going on. Realize something really important, though. Expressing empathy and compassion don't mean you have to give in. It doesn't mean you have to agree with your partner. Just because you hear your partner's perspective, realizing that feelings don't need a reason, they don't need a justification. When you get your partner talking about their feelings, you're not giving in on your perspective. Okay? Maybe Frank felt like he was absolutely justified in getting home 2 hours late. I might disagree, but Frank is entitled to his perspective. But remember that conversation that Frank and Mary had. How differently would that have gone if they had started with ask, don't tell, empathy, compassion? If Mary had started the conversation with, gosh, Frank, I'm sure upset and frustrated and disappointed right now, and I'd like to talk about it. What does that bring up in Frank? It doesn't bring up Newton's third law, I'm going to push, 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 because he doesn't know if she's upset. What it does instead is it taps into some of the positive feelings, the empathy and connection that probably brought those two together in the first place. It compels Frank to go, what's going on? Ask, don't tell. And then Mary can say, hey, I thought you were going to be home at 8. I had dinner ready. Now dinner's cold. I feel like you just weren't paying attention to, I have this belief that you weren't paying attention to what you committed to with me, and I find it really frustrating because it undermines my needs, and I feel not considered or paid attention to in this. You see how that takes them on a very different trajectory than what is wrong with you, you're a terrible partner? It changes everything. How differently would that exchange have gone if they could have used these 5 skills? And I'm here to tell you, communication skills would not have gotten it done because they were communicating, just not about the right stuff. Hey friends, thanks for being here today. I'm always grateful that you are. Please do leave comments down below if you have questions, things you want me to drill down on. And until next time, I'll see you later. Be well.